Pregnant woman is kidnapped by gangsters and forced onto an operating table. Doctors prepare to remove the baby she's carrying. In desperation, Yağmur spots an escape route. She catches the right moment and kicks the doctor. But this alerts the gangster Turhan. To protect the baby in her tummy, she desperately runs away. Unfortunately, just as she runs out of the alley, she's hit by a car. Turhan urgently calls a private doctor to treat her. He can't bear to hurt her as she is his brother's lover, so he calls the gangster's advisor and lies that she's been in a car accident and had a miscarriage. But the advisor is still not satisfied and orders him to make Yağmur disappear from this world forever. Turhan can't bear to do that. When Yağmur wakes up, he suggests her to escape with the baby and never come back. It turns out that the love of her life, who is a mob boss, is about to be married to the daughter of his antagonistic family, and the existence of Yağmur and the baby in her womb is a huge threat to both the gangster families. A year ago, mob boss Hazmet killed the head of Turkey's most dangerous family. Although he survived, he suffered a serious gunshot wound to the chest. To escape his enemies, he fled the country and flew to London. This is the first time he saw the beautiful Yağmur. Yağmur had a fear of flying and begged the stewardess to let her sit in a seat away from the window. So she was placed next to Hazmet. Hazmet didn't drive her away because she seemed so harmless. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently. She was so scared that she grabbed the armrest next to her. She didn't have the courage to open her eyes, so she was unaware that Hazmet's hand was bleeding from the cuts she made on it. Hazmet endured the pain and held her wrist to give her a sense of security. His henchmen were stunned. They couldn't believe that the usually aloof Hazmet had such a gentle side. When Yağmur calmed down, she realized she had hurt a stranger. She apologized and took out a Hello Kitty band-aid and put it on his wound. She melted his cold heart. His loving gaze made Yağmur's cheeks blush and her heart pound. Just when he wanted to talk to her more, the stewardess called her away. After getting off the plane, he went to the shelter with his half-brother Turhan. He didn't seek out Yağmur again, because now he's being hunted. It's not a good time to fall in love. He forged ID cards with the intention of living here under a false identity for a while. In the middle of the conversation, his chest suddenly ached. His henchman realized that his wound was infected and urged him to go to the hospital to have it treated. After bandaging the wound, he ran into the woman he'd been thinking about day and night. He couldn't help but hit on her. He made a joke about a scratch she gives him, which made Yağmur even more interested in him. The two soon fell in love. As they got to know each other better, Yağmur realized that he was always serious. She wanted him to be happy every day, so she pulled a muscle on his face to make the smile. A man who is so used to seeing evil knows what a pure heart looks like. In front of her, Hazmet has no need for bravado. He can be a carefree little boy. But he never revealed his gangster identity or his past to her. Whenever his wounds ached, Yağmur would cradle him and soothe him. She didn't ask him what he had been through. She only cared about living happily with him. Yağmur became the medicine for Hazmet's wounds. Hazmet became optimistic. However, danger won't leave you alone just because you're in love. While playing basketball outdoors that day, Hazmet noticed they were being tracked. So he went to his advisor, Hamza, to discuss what to do. Hamza suggested that he reconcile with his enemies. Since both sides have been fighting for years, neither side can afford to keep the battle going at this point. In order to settle this mess once and for all, Hazmet plans to go back to Turkey. Meanwhile, Yağmur is pregnant. She is about to tell Hazmet the good news, but his brother stops her. Once Hazmet finds out she's pregnant, he won't be interested in dealing with the family's problems. Yağmur doesn't know what urgent things they have to do, but she doesn't want to be a burden to him, so she chooses to bear everything alone and waits for him to come back before telling him he's going to be a father. Before saying goodbye, she gives him a watch containing a picture of them together. Hazmet promises to come back for her when he's done with everything. He takes out a diamond ring and asks her to marry him. Yağmur is overjoyed and says yes. She says she'll surprise him when he returns. For her safety, he asks his brother to stay here and take care of her. Then he flies back to Istanbul. But he overestimated the loyalty of his henchmen. When Hamza learns of Yağmur's pregnancy, he's annoyed. He calls Hazmet's stepmother to discuss a solution. For the sake of the family's honor and survival, the stepmother couldn't let Hazmet be trapped in love. So they threatened Turhan to perform an abortion. He has no choice but to lure Yağmur to a clinic and take her to see Hamza. Hamza tells her about Hazmet's true identity and his great mission. Even though Hazmet killed the head of the rival family, it didn't end the blood feud between the two families. Both sides are in constant danger of being assassinated at any moment. Eventually, the two sides negotiated a marriage to make peace. Since Hazmet is in love with Yağmur, she is the biggest obstacle to the marriage. The child in her tummy becomes a great threat. So Hamza orders his men to take her away for an abortion. He asks Turhan to clean up the mess. He goes back to Istanbul to help Hazmet. During the operation, Yağmur escapes, but is in a car accident. Turhan helps her and saves the baby. He can't bear to see her being hunted, so he lies to the others and tells them she's miscarried. To protect his family, he persuades her to stay away from Hazmet forever and never disclose anything about the baby. He says if Hazmet doesn't marry the daughter of the man he killed, the feud will never end. Otherwise, the enemies will kill Hazmet or Yağmur one day. At first, Yağmur is reluctant and cries for a long time. But to protect her beloved man and her child, she leaves London and is cut off from Hazmet. On the other hand, Hazmet leads his crew to negotiate with a rival family. He was unaware of their marriage plans and what they had done to Yağmur. When he realizes that he is being sacrificed for the marriage, he immediately rises up against it. This leads to a confrontation. His stepmother throws out a turban to help him out for a while. He runs out of the conference room to meet his betrothed, Nupelda. Nupelda is happy with the deal because she's loved Hazmet since she was a child. Even though Hazmet killed her father, she doesn't care about that and wants to be his wife. But how can a man in love accept a forced marriage? He wants to go back to his beloved as soon as possible. But Hamza tells him it's too late. Yağmur already knew everything and had left. Hazmet gets furious and pushes him against the wall and asks him what he has done to Yağmur. But as Nupelda is watching, they can't say much. Hazmet flies to London in a hurry to explain everything to Yağmur. But by the time he gets back to his apartment, Yağmur has disappeared. He calls Yağmur's phone and realizes that the ringtone is coming from Turhan's pocket, which means that Turhan doesn't know where she is either. Hazmet is anxious and in grief. He spends his days in tears and roars at the sky to vent his frustration. However, no amount of suffering or threats could stop him from searching for his beloved. He drives to Yağmur's best friend's house and asks her for news of Yağmur. Man, that's right. Yağmur is in her house. But Rem eagerly walks out the door and tries to kick him out. She thinks he's a scumbag. He impregnated Yağmur and dumped her. To prevent Yağmur from getting hurt again, she warns him to stop chasing Yağmur. But she couldn't stop Yağmur from thinking about him. Yağmur opens the curtains to get a glimpse of the man she loves. Hazmet looks up and meets her eyes as if in a moment of clarity. He tries to rush in to find her. He wouldn't back down even if Rem and her husband beat him together. During the fight, a gun drops out of his pocket. He picks it up, but a couple of cops on patrol happen to see it. He eventually gets arrested for illegal gun possession and deported from the UK. Upon his return to Turkey, he loses track of Yağmur to everyone's manipulation. Under pressure from many forces, Hazmet marries Nupelda. On their wedding night, Nupelda tries to seduce him. She knows he has another blonde woman on his mind, but she still hopes to touch him and make him fall in love with her. Hazmet pushes her away without hesitation. Though Nupelda gets him, she doesn't get his heart. Meanwhile, Yağmur returns to his father's house with much sorrow and regret. When she is alone and helpless, she thinks of giving up her child. But she couldn't get the baby out of her tummy, just as she couldn't get Hazmet out of her mind. Unable to bear the pain alone, she tells her father about the pregnancy, hoping to get his help. But her conservative father immediately pushes her aside. The fact that his daughter is pregnant out of wedlock is a disgrace to him. What's more, Yağmur refuses to tell him who the father is. This makes him ashamed to face the rest of the town and to give an explanation to his dead wife. In a fit of anger, he makes it clear that if she tries to give birth to the child, he will break off the paternity bond with her. He would never claim her baby as his grandson. Without her father's support, Yağmur has to work in a hairdresser's store to pay for her daily expenses and maternity checkups. However, as her belly grows bigger, gossip and nasty words reach their ears. This adds to the shame of the father, who is already feeling humiliated. He comes to his deceased wife's grave in the pouring rain to cry and complain. He doesn't know what he should do. Yağmur catches up with him and cries about her heartbreak and difficulties. Her long-suppressed emotions burst forth. She picks up a stone and hands it to her father. She kneels down and begs him to end her life and pain with it. Though he still could not forgive her, he could not bear to hurt her. Suddenly, Yağmur experiences a sudden burst of pain and her water breaks. Looking at the picture of his dead wife, he realizes that he can hardly bear the pain of losing another loved one. So he kneels in front of his daughter and delivers her. The lonely father and daughter get a new family member. On the other hand, Nupelda is suffering all day long about the baby. She tries in every way to give Hazmet a child. But Hazmet doesn't cooperate with her at all. He even treats her with indifference. He treats her more like a business partner than a wife. Nupelda is devastated, but there's nothing she can do about it. She has to go against him in business and challenge his authority to get a little bit of his attention. Just then, one of his men texts him that he's found Yağmur. He immediately drives to Yağmur's hometown. He sees Yağmur laughing with the man next to her. He thinks they're a couple. He sobs uncontrollably, but he still couldn't let go of her. He goes to Yağmur's house and asks her why she left him behind. Seeing the love of her life in front of her, Yağmur wants to jump into his arms. But she remembers those people's warnings and knows that he has a new wife. For the safety of him and her child, she can only suppress her love for him. In order to make him leave willingly, she lies that she is married to another man and has a child. Hazmet storms out, disappointed and angry. What goes with him is Yağmur's bravado and faith. She throws herself into her best friend's arms and balls. Hazmet returns home in despair. Nupelda knows he went to Yağmur. She doesn't mind him thinking of another woman and even begs him to take her as Yağmur in bed. But when he refuses once again, she is completely overwhelmed. She steps on the watch that Yağmur gave him. Hazmet does not confront her, for he is already dead in his heart. From then on, he lives day and night in his beautiful fantasies about Yağmur. Several years pass, and Yağmur's son grows up. His facial features almost look like a miniature version of Hazmet's. The man who said he'd never take him as a grandson now loves him more than anything else. Yağmur's cousin invites them to go to Istanbul for a trip. At the request of her father and son, Yağmur decides to step out of her hometown and relax. However, fate is so magical that some people may just be destined to meet each other. She stays in the same hotel as Hazmet's meeting place. Hazmet stands behind her and recognizes the matured woman. Unfortunately, she doesn't even glance behind her. She concentrates on holding her child and chatting with another man. Hazmat's mind flashes through a million hypotheses. He recalls that she said she had a surprise for him. He realizes that this child could very well be his son. But with Nupelda at his side, he could only control his urge to go after her. As soon as Nupelda leaves, he comes to the dining room and jumps into Yağmur's arms. Yağmur can't believe what's happening. Through questioning, Hazmat ascertains that the woman he loves gave birth to a son. His dead heart beats again. He would never let go of Yağmur's hand, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. Realizing that it is not appropriate to speak in public, he begs Yağmur to wait for him in her room. Yağmur knows that there is no escape for her. She then comes to the balcony as promised. Hazmat greedily smells the scent of her, which he is obsessed with. He improvises a poem about his love and longing for her. Yağmur is moved and turns into his arms. She reveals the reasons why his family tried to abort her and why she left him. With the misunderstanding clearing up, the wonderful life of the two, which had stagnated years ago, reflows. Hazmat gets to know his son. He makes Hamza, who deceived him, pay with his life. Then he sends Yağmur and his son to a secret island. This family of three happily spends some quality time together. However, Nupelda is watching every move he makes. Nupelda finds out about his affair with Yağmur. Jealous, she calls on her brother for help. Her brother is trying to use this opportunity to convince her to eliminate Hazmat. He could never forget that Hazmat was his father's murderer. But for the sake of Nupelda's marriage, he holds back from killing Hazmat. With Nupelda's permission, he captures Hazmat's brother. Then he makes a phone call and threatens Hazmat to show up. Hazmat knows that in all likelihood, he won't come back, but he insists on going. He says goodbye to the love of his life with a kiss and lulls his son to sleep. Only by ending his relationship with Nupelda's family could he leave the gangs for good and be with her forever. Soon he enters the heavily guarded Nupelda house. Facing countless guns and enemies, Hazmat has no fear. He asks his men to take his brother away while he stays behind to deal with his enemies. Nupelda doesn't stop them from leaving. After all, Hazmat is the only one she's been after since the beginning. Looking at the man she loved for so many years, she couldn't bear to hurt him. Even if he cheated and toyed with her, Nupelda still wants to give him a chance. She's willing to be a stepmother, to accept and care for his son, but only if Yağmur leaves their lives. Hazmat shakes his head and walks straight forward. He blocks the gun with his chest. He knows that his life would be worse than death without Yağmur, so he doesn't want to go through life without her again. Looking at his enemies all around him, he realizes that he won't be able to walk out of here today. He asks Nupelda if his death will stop the bloodshed and the war. Looking at him with a determined gaze, Nupelda finally nods her head in sorrow. Seeing Nupelda's hesitation, her brother rushes forward and urges her to shoot. Nupelda tells him how much she loves him. She begs him to stay with her, but Hazmat's mind is occupied with his lover and his son. For their safety, he pulls the trigger himself. With his death, he brings an end to the blood feud between the two families. Several decades later, Hazmat's son walks down the aisle of matrimony. Nupelda comes to the wedding as his elder and gives her blessing. This is Maroon Recap. If there's a movie you'd like to watch, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. Let's watch a movie together and experience something different. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.